Welcome to Positive Personal Power with hope, aspiration, and encouragement. Our goal is to build and enhance people's confidence and strength to handle life's challenges. Now, let me introduce you to your host, Nathaniel Skula.
Classic. Well, today I'm really privileged to be joined by Alastair Stewart OBE and Mike Tobin OBE as well. And this should be really super thought-provoking episode. Welcome, Alastair. It's a real pleasure.
Good to see you, Nat, and my old mate Mike Tobin there as well. Hi, Mike.
Hi, how you doing? Are you well today?
Let's get the terms defined. I have to tell you, in all honesty, Mike's known me a long time. Nat, you and I have just met. I wouldn't say I've been the most depressed these last few weeks, but I've been the most confused because everything is changing because of COVID-19, the way we interact, the way we try and do business, the way we try and write, the way journalism is interacting with this national crisis, the political leadership and so on. And it's a kind of intellectual, emotional jungle. So I wouldn't say, oh, I'm all terribly despondent, it's dreadful, because there's so much to think about. And there's, just being depressed is utterly negative. But the rules of engagement have completely changed. It's like suddenly trying to play Monopoly one night, but all the rules are in Japanese, which I don't speak a word of.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I've got a few questions here, nothing too painful. I mean, news and current affairs, media affects the well-being of people. So how do you feel about the current reputation of the press in this context? Because I know we were talking a little bit before about that.
Sure. It's interesting. YouGov have been doing some research, and there are a couple of polls recently. And people like Nick Robinson on the Today programme, BBC guy, I've known him for years, brilliant former political editor at the Beeb as well, celebrating the fact, not in a silly way, because Nick Robinson doesn't do silly, but celebrating in the fact that journalism, particularly journalists who attend the Number 10 press conferences, are top of the list in public trust. And their score, 43%. Wow. Of the public trust them. That means that 57% simply don't. And down it goes. The broadsheets, the great papers like the FT and what have you, are lower than that. The red tops are just out of it. And again, I think part of the problem is because they genuinely don't know what they're doing. And I'm not suggesting amateurism. Editors and top correspondents, television, print, the rest of it, are dealing with a crisis the like of which they have never in their lives addressed. And they're making it up as they go along, and they're applying the old rules of shock horror. I was talking to Sally, my wife, who Mike knows very well, just this morning about it. And there's a Richard Littlejohn piece in the Mail saying, why all the doom and gloom? Are they all trying to make their names by coming up with the bleakest, darkest, worst story in the world? Because that's how they kind of used to do it. So I don't think journalism is having a great time of it at the moment. I think there are one or two standouts, but in the main, no, not great.
No. I think you're right. I mean, historically, journalism was about sort of telling the truth. It wasn't, it was trying to get to the truth, and it was sort of cutting through the stories and the clouds of what people were trying to portray and getting to the actual facts. And now it seems that they take a fact and create a load of sort of fluff around it to make a story that isn't necessarily the truth. It's kind of a very odd turnaround.
But being pedantic, I mean, journalism du jour, the day, it's what happened. You write the piece and you read the paper and it gives you detailed analysis of what happened event by event. And then columnists arrived, and very good people like Matthew Paris and Matthew Dancona, who write terribly clever pieces about why X, Y, and Z happened. That's all fine. But to get the account of the day, you're absolutely right. And what I sit watching so much, which frustrates me, is this string of questions. Why didn't you do X when Operation Cygnus was run? And why well, with all due respect, the best thing Boris Johnson can say is, I don't know. But today is today. Yeah. There is literally nothing that he can do about what wasn't done 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks ago. Apologize or resign.
Yeah, exactly.
And that seems to me to be banging your head against a brick wall and celebrating the fact that blood is now streaming from your nose.
Yeah,
you know, it is funny. I heard someone on the TV just the other day, and it was about developing it was in the discussion about developing the vaccine, and so they said, oh, we think we've got this, and somebody asked exactly that question: why didn't you do this earlier? Well, if we could have done it earlier, we would have done it earlier, but here we are, we're doing it.
Or will you keep it for Britain? Will Britain get it first, or will you export it? Will the Americans nick this idea? Yeah. How about well done Oxford University, well done Imperial College, and stick my neck out, well done Her Majesty's government on behalf of taxpayers like the three of us for finding an extra £40 million to help those great universities accelerate the research. That might cheer people up a bit and give them some hope.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I thought was quite interesting. I think it was the Italian Prime Minister or one of the Italian mayors, and I saw this video, and he basically just said, he said, if I'd have actually told everyone that they were getting locked down immediately as soon as this thing had happened, it would have been absolute catastrophe. Yeah. Complete ridiculous behavior. Imagine if that had happened here. People would have gone, what? You're joking. We're going out. Right.
Yeah.
So there's managing expectations, isn't there? And that kind of stuff. But I've got another good question here. So how do you see people's well-being being affected by the news in times of this global crisis? Do you see that they are, more depressed or encouraged? I mean, from what you've said, it's quite a pessimistic, or is it a mixed feelings that people are getting from this?
Well, my old bosses, ITV News, commissioned some very interesting research, which was published last night on the bulletins, which was mainly about NHS staff. But obviously there's care workers, hospice workers, there's a whole army of these amazing people who are up against it. 1 in 10 had contemplated suicide, and 40% were finding it just emotionally and intellectually incredibly difficult to get through this. Now, I think that was a good piece of research to report upon, because it's about empathy and understanding what these good folk. Yeah, we all applaud Captain Moore and say that's brilliant, and we raise over 30 million quid. NHS Charities exists to provide money for those people working in the NHS who are up against it. It's not to buy PPE and stuff like that, it's to look after it. And I was talking to the boss of NHS Charities the other day, and their biggest single challenge is not the money, it's what to do with it, how you channel that towards these people. So I think reporting positive stuff like the dear captain and his now colonel and what have you, that's very, very good. I think individuals' mental health, given what we were saying earlier on, that the backdrop to that is that they are individually isolated, or they're isolated with their families, or they're in hospital, they're in care homes, what have you. They're still consuming newspapers, predominantly online. They're watching television and radio. And I'm tempted to say something which many of my colleagues would beat me to a pulp for saying, and that is that we have a duty of care as well, not simply to be trying to drive folk into the ground the whole time. And I think there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. But it is it is interesting that we do have the ability within media to channel that good hope. Right. So, I mean, Captain Moore, Colonel Moore now is now over 32 million. I just had a quick check on it's amazing. It's just, and we're able to garner that almost negativity. The Clap for Heroes is another example where everyone's coming out and creating a feel good environment out of this.
Just for something, because it just came to me when you were saying that. With really Question Time a couple of weeks ago, they had Ruby Wax on, who I don't know if Nat knows her, but I know.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely brilliant woman. I mean, she's funny, she's irritating, she's rude, all this. But as a campaigner on mental health, because she's had her own issues, bless her heart, is absolutely up there with the very, very best. And she was on Question Time, and all that she wanted to say was, one thing that might come out of this whole crisis is that we carry on being nice to each other, and that will help us get through the aftermath, the hangover of crisis. And the programme shut her down. They kept shutting her down because they wanted to move on to something else. And I was going bonkers, absolutely, metaphorically and literally. And people like Alastair Campbell, who again has his own issues of depression and the rest of it, he's really been pushing very, very hard on mental health, not just right now, but when it's medically over. How are folk going to deal with the fact that, you know, like Mike gave an example just a few moments ago, they're going to work, doing business pattern will change, or they won't have a job. Or if they work in the airline industry, there will be 15% of their industry left when we resume hostilities. Supermarkets, that's great, but they're not exactly the most high-powered jobs in the world. New businesses will come up, which you two are both absolute experts and brilliant on, but it'll all change. And for a lot of people, that is going to be absolutely mentally racking, as well as challenging their checkbook. So I'm all for people like Ruby Wax. Look for the positive with an open mind, but also look to the future. What is it going to be like in 2021, 22?
Well, it's funny, because yesterday I was, I'm an NHS volunteer responder, and I got a call yesterday, and this lovely old man just down the road from me at home, and he's, you know, he didn't have a medical or a sort of a social issue. He just wanted to moan at someone because he'd applied to the council to put a rail down his corridor so that his wife could get to the bathroom on her own without help. And it's been months before, you know, they still haven't put this rail in, you know, it's called NHS. I'm kind of like, and I said, well, you know, I don't know what I can do about your rail, but I found myself then engaging with him, just talking and saying, how are you anyway? Because he started the call with such kind of, you know, you could feel this pent up sort of, and it turns out both of them were registered disabled, and you know, obviously finding everything, you know, very overwhelming mentally, as well as kind of, and it was just this one thing, and obviously it wasn't a little thing, but it was something that had existed for 4 months. But the point was that he needed to vent. And I sat on the phone with him for half an hour. They started off saying, look, I can't come and install your rail, right? And I'll probably get sued if it comes off the wall or something. But you know, we ended up having a conversation. At the end of it, he was like, "Oh, thank you," and I didn't feel I'd done anything other than chat to him for half an hour.
Yeah.
But you know, it is this kind of this sort of feeling of you know, how do you outlet all the frustrations? And you can imagine being someone that works for an airline at the moment, as you mentioned, and thinking like, you know, I don't know if I've got a job to go back to. I'm furloughed at the moment, so yeah, I've got this pay packet, this next pay packet. The impact to industry, and in my second book, I talk about this. At the end, the rate of sort of Ubering of businesses is getting greater. You know, and Uber now is a verb as well as a noun, right? And it's kind of, you know, your business has just been Ubered because yesterday it existed and now it doesn't. And so you know, we almost have to, and you know, since the 2008-2009 sort of financial crisis, a lot of the people that came out of the financial industry, which couldn't find a job because the industry just shrunk so much, were Uber drivers. And now Uber has just lost their license in London. So what are they going to do, right? And you know, you kind of say, well, they're all going to be the Deliveroo drivers for tomorrow, or whatever it is, because now Deliveroo's going crazy because no one can go out to restaurants. Yeah.
But also, you get, when you think the financial crisis, one of the 2007-8 coming out of that, one of the things was because, you know, at the heart of it was dodgy mortgages repackaged up as a financial product and all the rest of it. Everybody knows about that.
Yeah.
But then at the front line, people like our daughter, who's in her mid-30s, so she was applying for her first reasonably large mortgage post those events, and the questions were tougher, and she had a lot more to prove, and the income to loan ratio was policed in the way it was. Like, I mean, I'm in my 60s, so it was a bit more like it used to be in the old days, and that's quite a good thing. So now we're hit by the COVID-19 crisis, and at least it means that those who are trying to service a mortgage, who've recently taken it out in the last 10 years or so, are servicing something that, bottom line is, they probably can afford to cope with. They're not servicing a bonkers mortgage that they can't afford anyway and should never have been sold. And secondly, you know, they've got a bit more comfort from negative equity. So out of these big crises, sometimes a little bit of good can come, but it is exactly what we've been talking about for the last 10, 15 minutes. We're all being Ubered in one way or another.
Yeah.
And your phone call to the guy with the rail is another good example of it. What is it? 250,000, 500,000 of you people phoned up. Alex, our son, is one of them as well. David Cameron used to talk about, the big society and you and I might first met through the voluntary sector, through charities, and you and I both keep doing it. But hey, wouldn't it be great if that was one of the armies that was formed post these events, and more folks guys who can't get rails?
Absolutely, I think it's just amazing that there are. So there's an app called Nextdoor. I don't know if you've noticed that one, and it's sectioned into little communities. So you can go onto Nextdoor and you put in your postcode, and it connects you with all the people in your area, just as a kind of like a blog, right? And on there, people are saying, I need a plumber now. Can anyone help? And then someone said, well, I'm a plumber. I live around the corner. What can I do for you? And it's rebuilding. It's technology, but it's rebuilding communities in the real sense.
You could, instead of calling it check a trade, you could call it check a chum.
Yes, you could.
Actually, that's a very good point.
I expect that to emerge from the Mike Tobin stable.
Check a chum. That's it. He's just come up. Next business idea is right there for anyone listening. Alastair Stewart has just nailed it. When you're ready. So
rate your neighbour 5 stars.
I can only imagine. So within the news and current affairs channels, how do you think we can? How can we rely on these to give us facts versus opinion?
Oh, fascinating question. And I've always thought, I began my journalistic career as an industrial correspondent in the late 70s with Southern TV in the days of Vosper Thornycroft, and there used to be miners in Kent and Snowdon Colliery and places like that. So then in the old days, and then Thatcher came in the 80s, and I was an industrial correspondent then with ITV News, ITN as it was. And I think I make an important distinction. I think the standout people in our coverage of COVID-19 have been people like Hugh Pym and Emily Morgan, BBC and ITV, respectively. I mean, not just because I'm ticking boxes, but I just happen to think they are both very, very good. Tom Clark and David Chupman, who are the science correspondents for ITV and BBC, when they put their hand up at the press conference, I really say, shut up, everybody. I really want to listen to this guy or gal. And I think that they are very, very good. I think the political correspondents, no names, no pack drill, but everybody knows who I'm talking about, have not had a great campaign for that reason I mentioned right at the beginning, unless you've snipped it out. And that is, it isn't a general election campaign, as a Labour, I think it may have been Keir himself actually said yesterday. This isn't, we've got better arguments because we want to win the election and be elected and form the next government, blah, blah, blah. We're in this trying to help sort it out. And I think many of the political correspondents are finding it quite difficult. They're seeing COVID-19 as a kind of election, an old-fashioned struggle of political competition, and it simply is not that. And the general reporters, some of them are doing a really great job, but this is going to sound really horrible, but I'm going to say it because I think it. There are just so many times that you can go into a community and film people whose hearts are on their sleeves and hearts are broken and keep pumping it up. We know. We're living it ourselves, whether we're lucky enough to have some disposable income or are on universal credit. We know that. And I'm not sure that if you're sitting at home and are one of those suffering like that, you necessarily want to see yet another 2.5 minutes of how dreadful it is in Darlington or Derby or Devonport.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I find actually TV, quite depressing at the moment, where it could be uplifting, and so I like when they talk about Captain Moore, and and that's wearing as well, right? Because it's
but also as you said earlier, and I think Nat did as well. I mean, there is an incredibly delicate balance to be sought. And that is, we do not want to be playing Goebbels barrier games where it's lies, spins, and, tractor production and Wellington boot production is still at its very highest in Eastern Siberia. As you said, Mike, right at the beginning, journalism it's about the facts. So let's drill down, let's get the facts, let's offer them to people. And my old adage about all journalism has always been impartial, balanced fact, and then let the viewer, consumer, listener, reader, him or her, make their own minds up. We just probe and probe and probe for those facts and then let them make up their own minds about it, but not banging on the whole time about heart on sleeves and we're all heading to the knacker's yard.
It's very difficult. Very difficult. I remember I was born at 76. So when you started your journalism career, I was born. Yeah. So I've heard you my whole life.
That makes you feel really old, though, I tell you.
Right. I've heard you speak, though, my whole life. Right.
Mike, people think it's a nice thing to say. Why?
Well, I thought it was a nice thing. I wasn't saying you were old, by the way. Anyhow. So let's go right back, to when you first started, and let's talk about some of the challenges that you've had to overcome in the 40 years of your news industry working life, and pick some really cool things that you think really shaped you.
Sure. Let me start with something. No story involved in this at all. No Berlin Gulf Wall, Pope in Britain or anything like that, but just purely given your interest and Mike's interest, it's the technology. When I first started, we filmed, literally, metaphorically, on film. So if you finished a story, you had to finish at least an hour and a bit early because you had to go back to the studios. The film had to be processed like holiday snaps that we took when we were children, or in your case, Nat, when your parents were children.
No, I had those.
And that process took sort of 20 minutes or so. And then the next thing was that we went on to digital videotape, but then that had to be loaded down onto a machine as well and then edited and what have you. And it was quicker than film, but it still took time. Now you go out and there's a little clip thing that goes, a card that goes into the camera, and the minute you get back into the studios, whether it's us or the BBC or Sky or whoever, it is ingested. I don't know if that's a vogue word, Mike, but that's what it's called. It's ingested into the server and it's ready to edit by anybody straight away. And the final thing is, I remember in the early 1980s, the Queen went to China on a visit, early 80s, and that was the first time we had live satellite news gathering, SNG. So the Queen walking on the Great Wall of China was seen in Bromsgrove, literally, would it be 2.5 seconds, Mike? Something like that.
Something, probably
after it actually happened, because it was up down on the satellites. So, without mentioning any stories specifically, that's the biggest single change. Lo and behold, as Tobin always tells us, it's technology, and you've got to think smart about the technology. Second quick point, and this one will be much, much quicker than that, but I think that really is important for people to understand, because again, whoever bought into digital, Sony and the rest of it, and there are companies that don't exist anymore, did very, very well indeed. But they were brave and at the margins. The two biggest stories that mattered most were the entire 80s with Margaret Thatcher restructuring an economy that was about to sink. And the second one, funnily enough, it ended in the 80s, 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was Europe rethinking how it did business and with it the rest of the world. So there have been some tasty ones as well, yeah. And that was all about fact. And both of them required incredible discipline not to become partisan, because both of them were so edgy. But I loved every minute of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've watched you, and you're very enthusiastic, and that's really, really great, right? But so really, it's about adapting. That's kind of what you're really talking about, adapting to the change of the media, which is what happened, when it went from film into VHS and that kind of thing.
Yes.
You were forced to change. So in essence, we're talking about what Mike and we talk about this all the time, right? Adapting and this show is hopefully to encourage people to kind of just not panic.
Yeah, but you touch on something there which relates back to the other general stuff that we were talking about, and it is literally a point of philosophy. When you were waiting for that film in the 1970s to process and be ready to edit, you had an extra 40 minutes of think time. What do I want to share with the viewers? How am I going to explain why X did Y without saying, yeah, but nudge, nudge, that's because she's bonkers or he's wonderful, whatever. By the time we got to the Gulf War, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and it was live satellite broadcasting, when the SH-1T hit the fan, you were live. You had to give your instant knee-jerk reaction. When I stood on the Berlin Wall, I was live. I had to give my instant knee-jerk reaction. All the floppy disks were whirring with fact and history and Hungary and Czechoslovakia, but how did I call it? That was my philosophy, my morality, my judgment, and my balance. Technology contrives to make everything so much quicker, and that is brilliant, but it factors out think time as well. And I'm sure that's true in business.
Oh yeah, very true.
I mean, it is. And I think that's super interesting, because the emphasis then goes back onto the journalist, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
The integrity and the quality and the experience of the journalist that has to play through, because you're live. So you can't, if you're going to report on something and you're standing there as it's happening. But I wonder, so at the moment, you see that when there's a sort of a Downing Street thing, right? But they still have something there's not many times where you have that situation where the wall is coming down around you and you've got to make a call on it. Because even today, when they're standing outside of Downing Street and they're waiting for a Prime Minister's questions, they can still prepare, because it's kind of live, but it isn't live, if you know what I mean. It's sort of, they're there live, but they're actually talking about what could happen, what might happen, what he might say. I've been pre-prepped with the questions and all that sort of stuff. So.
And the pre-prepping is from their editors and from Downing Street. They'll be given a little steer. The Prime Minister today will be talking about X, Y, and Z, PPE, testing targets, whatever it might be. So you'd have that in your mind. But one of the criticisms that makes me laugh, slightly cynically sometimes, but again, it's another huge rule of thumb I learned from the greats like Alastair Burnett and Brian Walden and what have you, is however clever the question is that you come up with, it's frightfully important to listen to the answer. And the number of people you see, they come up with their very clever gotcha question, and the minister says X, Y, or Z, and they're straight off onto the next one. And 9 times out of 10, Paxman was a master of it. The answer to question 1 negates 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You go straight to 8, or you come up with something that you hadn't thought of. But to get that, you've got to listen. And there was one celebrated participant in the number 10 press conference yesterday who was utterly crucified on social media because that person, I won't even say gender because it will give a clue, and anyone who wants to look it up will find it straight away anyway. But the Prime Minister had given a very clear answer on the timetable of exit strategy, and the question was, okay, fine, first question, when are we going to exit? and Boris Johnson, you could kind of see his face go,
It's actually trending. It's trending on Twitter. If anybody.
Oh, is it? Okay, fine. He wasn't going to say the 1st of June or the 7th of May or whatever. What he said was there are 5 tests to be met, and when they are met, then we will be lifting it all. And next week I'll publish more detail of that.
And the funny thing is,
so you then probe the 5 tests. Are they the right tests? I would like to know who is going to be policing those tests. Is it ministers? Is it senior civil servants? Is it outside experts? Do people remember Michael Gove on experts? Do we trust experts or not? We've got the scientists at Imperial College, but what about behaviorologists? What about economists and this, that, and the other? But not so. Okay, I've heard everything you say, but when are we going to leave it?
Well, I can't believe that. I was doing the washing up though, and I actually remember him distinctly saying, once these 5 things are taken care of, then we're going to exit and we're going to give you a plan next week.
The funny thing is that journalist has the benefit almost every single day of asking the first question, because they go to them as the kind of host. daily update. And they get the benefit of asking the most pertinent question every day, right? And you've got a follow-up opportunity before anyone else gets a chance. So your follow-up call is as important because it gives you that unique, opportunity to probe into the most important thing before any other journalist has a chance to speak.
The other funny thing is the questions about, don't you wish that you'd done X, Y, and Z back in January, or even earlier than that? I've always wondered what the journalists would do if the Prime Minister said, I really wish I had. Next question. What's the headline? Prime Minister admits he wished he'd done so-and-so 3 months ago. Where does that take anybody?
No.
As opposed to Prime Minister invests £40 million in Oxford University's chase for a new vaccine.
Isn't that something for life as well, though, right? Because isn't there something about no regrets? Isn't there something about kind of, if you're always looking back and saying, I wish I'd have done that then, or I wish I'd have, is that kind of wasted energy? Is that?
I think you learn from your lessons, but certainly you can't rewrite it. You can't rewrite history. There's that lovely Chinese leader. I can't remember the name, but the one who said he was asked about the French Revolution in the early 20th century, said far too soon to tell. I mean, sometimes things do take a little bit of time, but the other thing in life generally, and I'm sure it's true in business, is the point of, okay, so what is it you want me to do to try and change it? So I accept that that's a problem, and I accept that our widgets aren't as good as somebody else's widgets, or our delivery times aren't as good as somebody else, and that I wish I'd ordered more PPE back in January, or I'd done this, that, and the other. Okay, but what do you want me to do now? How can I make it better going forward? Because I sure as hell, I nearly said the wrong word, I cannot rewrite it. I can't undo, however big a mistake it was. And if it's a really big mistake, the best I can do is look straight into camera and say, I'm really sorry, I screwed up.
Which is a perfectly human...
There isn't going to be a general election. Nobody's going to take over from him. So okay, fine, so you screwed up. Now, what are you going to do to rectify it?
And that's a human trait, that to screw up occasionally, right? We all do it all the time. And the differentiation of, between kind of a positive person or a successful person is how many times you screw up and then do something about it afterwards. It's not.
But it's also the addiction to apology, and will you apologise for so and so? And the truth is, you can have your fingers crossed or your toes crossed. You say, yes, I'm really sorry. And if you did a bit of Amdram at school, you can say it with really great conviction. But in the business world, if I buy X and it doesn't work, and I contact the manufacturer or supplier and say, this is really not what I wanted, and it hasn't worked, and so on. The last thing I want is, I'm really sorry. I want one that works, or I want my money back so I can go and consume somewhere else.
But
same rules apply in politics.
But in life, right? Like it's tough, but you get through it, and then one day you might wake up and say, well, actually, I learned these new skills from the time that I was furloughed. I decided to put some effort in, and I learned how to edit video, or learn how to write, or learn how to do something. Like, you've got the perfect opportunity now to pivot your career into something which you might really want to do. And you've got the time to learn about anything. And there's so much information in every single thing.
We were talking a little bit about mental health and mental well-being earlier on. The other thing I would add to that absolutely correct list, and I've rediscovered this, or I've learned language, or I've reread fabulous books I haven't read. I'm always a favorite, but I haven't read it for 10 years. We may just also have rediscovered the advantage of doing nothing for a little while. Or, we are lucky enough to have a garden, and I can see you down there in Sussex have got a lovely backdrop, and I know where Mike is, and there is a garden, but there's also lovely walks by the river and the rest of it. Just do that for 20 minutes and don't think about anything. Just chill. So, it's one down from yoga, but goodness me, that's not a bad thing to consider doing as well.
Yeah, I saw an article. I saw an article on LinkedIn that spoke about, so not dissimilar to what you just mentioned, that where it kind of said, anyone that doesn't come out of this environment with a new skill or is wasting their time. And then someone responded saying, well, yeah, that in itself is applying a pressure to people that may be an unnecessary pressure. If you feel you're obliged to do something with your time, you're obliged not to waste your time. I wonder how much of a pressure that applies to people. And to your point, Alastair, it's kind of, it's okay sometimes to do. I think everything in life is a balance, right? So you can't do nothing all the time and expect to sort of meander through life on somebody else's ticket. But at the same time, it's okay, I think, to take space and just reflect on things.
Yes, I agree with that completely.
Yeah, most definitely. And also some people will be paralyzed from doing anything because they're so stressed out of their minds. They're down to the last can of baked beans, last loaf of bread, or not even that, and they don't know what to do. And it's like, those are the people that I really feel for. Yeah.
I think it's a very stark reminder. You can, in times of growth and wealth creation and distribution and the rest of it, you can really indulge yourself in good old-fashioned class battle journalism and the capitalist class doing this and the poor downtrodden slaves of labor, this, that, and the other. But everybody's kind of bouncing along, or the vast majority are. Right now, there are genuinely people out there who are suffering through absolutely no fault of their own at all. And it's got very little to do with political philosophy, and it's got very little to do with economic ideology. They just haven't got a job. They haven't got him. And a big shout out for Rishi Sunak and what the government are trying to do in support schemes.
Yeah.
But there are an awful lot of people out there who've got sweet FA.
Yeah, and it's happened so fast. I think that's the thing, is the speed of it. The speed of how this is affecting people. There's no time to get used to any change in the situation. It's just from one day you've got a job to the next day you've got nothing and no future, that is really, really tough. And I think stress, when I did my South Pole trek, right? I mean, when you're under stress, you don't think properly as well. Your mind, you've got so many things that are attacking your body. Almost goes into kind of self-preservation mode first on a physical level. You've got kind of extremely, minus 50 degrees, you've got no feeling in all these things. And suddenly you try to think, okay, what do I do about my issues? And your brain just won't work. Your brain just does not function at the same level. It functions on a kind of, let's just go into a ball and keep warm type thing. And I think when people are under stress, it is it's a spiral, because you need thought processes, you need to be logical and all those good things to get out of it. But actually you're in a process that stops you doing that.
Yes, I think the other thing, interesting part of that jigsaw puzzle is self-confidence and self-belief.
Yeah.
When you were trekking for great causes, but it was a huge physical challenge as well. Whenever us do something like that, which is putting ourselves out, a little bit for a good purpose. One of the great drivers is that we believe we can do it. And we believe that we're surrounded by a network of people who believe we can do it, whether it's Shalina or people that you've worked with or business partners. They believe that you can do it. I was a chap on television the other night, it was a young plumber. My heart really went out for him, because he only a couple of years ago got his HNDs and the rest of it, done an apprenticeship, and he just set up his own business as a plumber in the last couple of 3 months. Gone. Absolutely everything. And he was really young, but so articulate. He said, I've just lost my self-confidence, my self-belief. And that was one of the most shocking little testimonials that I'd heard. It wasn't Michael O'Leary talking about Ryanair, and he was brilliant about it and the nature of the change business plan and business model. This was just a young lad, early 20s, did okay at school, did his HND, did an apprenticeship, can fix my boiler. Thank God I need that occasionally. And suddenly it's all gone. And with it has gone his self-confidence.
Yeah. It's very difficult. That's very difficult to get over that sort of side of things. I remember being outside the job centre and parking my motorcycle on the pavement. And at that time, you were getting paid, I think it was £36 a week, job seekers allowance. And I parked my motorcycle right in Guildford, right next to the pavement, right next to the wall. It was like a 7-foot wide pavement. And then And then I came out, and this parking attendant, and he put a ticket on my bike. It cost me like 60 quid. And I was like, that's more than like a week's worth of my food money, yeah, let alone any other bills that I've got to pay, right? And I never forget that moment. And it's really tough. It's really, really tough. But like, I can't imagine what it's like for some of these guys. And, you know, have faith that something good is going to come from it. Yeah, you're either going to die or you're going to die trying, right? And then when you come out the other side, it hopefully will be a better place. I mean, more empathy in the world is what I think that's what I feel in my neighborhood. I walk down the street in Chichester, and people are more friendly to each other. All right, they might not be you know, close to each other, but they greet each other in a different way. And I'm positive about things myself.
I think also I'd underline what Mike was saying in his lovely anecdote about the elderly gentleman on the rail, is when, you know, when your confidence is knocked and you're down and it all looks pretty awful, don't ever forget that it's still worth asking, because there are a lot of good people out there who will listen. And like Mike, he may not be able to fix the rail, but that 20-minute conversation probably left the old guy feeling, hey, you know, I'll feel better for that. The rail's still a bloody problem, but at least there's somebody out there who cared.
Mike, that's brilliant.
Mental well-being. I'm not, you know, all on my own like that young plumber.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alastair. It's been absolutely fantastic, and thanks so much, Mike, for arranging. It's been super. Really appreciate it.
Lovely to meet you, Nat, and always lovely to talk to you, Mike, and give my love to Shalina.
Thanks for listening to Positive Personal Power. Do subscribe via your favorite podcasting app, and please leave us a 5-star review. Or sign up on our website, positivepersonalpower.net, for weekly emails and updates, and do share our episodes with your friends and on social media. Feel free to reach out anytime.